U.S.-Zambia relationship is stronger than ever. We are committed to maintaining and strengthening our partnership. Zambia is a leading nation in providing trained and ready peacekeepers to United Nations and regional security missions, and a leader in integrating women into the armed forces. CTAF Africa, the Zambia Army have trained together recently in areas such as military intelligence, civil affairs and logistics, medical readiness, enlisted soldier and non-commissioned officer development, demining, and engineering. Is in support of diplomacy and in close concert with our Department of State colleagues. Their support of this year's planning has been growing. This year's African Land Forces Summit hosts approximately 400 attendees from 39 African nations and 6 of our European allies from NATO, including Brazil and from the U.S. There are 22 state partnership programs between U.S. states and African nations, and many of those are represented here in House. As our president has said, the U.S. is all in on Africa and all in with our African partners. We view African Land Forces as key partners in shaping the next century within and outside of Africa. Finally, the theme for this year's Land Forces Summit is regional solutions to transnational problems. This is the world in which we all live, with problems and security challenges that cross borders and continents. And working with our partners is the approach with which we will succeed in tackling these challenges and safeguarding the people we serve. I'm confident this will be the best house to be. It's a great venue to see so many familiar places, so many familiar faces in one place, meet new friends, and deepen our partnership with our professional business. And I look forward to taking your questions. Thank you.
You mentioned that
anticipate what those solutions might be because we still have a week of discussion to pursue some of the ideas that each of the program brings. So I that this will be very constructive in identifying some of those solutions.
Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, very shortly we shall be beginning our session, first session for the day. May I kindly ask you to settle down? May I kindly ask you to settle down and also to take this opportunity to turn off Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished delegates to the summit. I hope you all enjoyed the opening ceremony yesterday, as well as the reception dinner, inclusive of the boat cruise. This morning, we have an important plenary session which is planned to discuss human trafficking and migration and their impacts on security. When we talk about migration, when we talk about human trafficking, in most cases, we are thinking Europe. Suffice to mention, distinguished delegates, that there is a lot of this vice happening right here on our continent. One of the flash news items yesterday here in Zambia, where you are, was an interception of a truck laden with 52 illegal immigrants from the Horn of Africa heading down to South Africa. What we may not know is whether all these illegal immigrants are economic immigrants. Others may have other motives of going to join terrorist activities where these are happening. And therefore, this becomes a topical issue that should be discussed in a forum such as this one. It is my honor and privilege this morning, ladies and gentlemen, to welcome the panel of experts that are going to discuss this topic this morning. And for this session, our moderator will be Brigadier General Kennedy Sialombe. General Sialombe is currently serving as Director General, Education, Libraries and Museums in the Zambia Army. He holds a Master of Arts in Peace and Conflict Studies, which he obtained from the Copperbelt University, a Bachelor of Arts degree in Education from the University of Zambia, and a Diploma in Defense and Security Studies, also obtained from the University of Zambia. He is an accredited author with the Professional Authors Association of Zambia, a researcher, and he has written several articles in international journals, newspapers, and magazines. During his service, Brigadier General Sialombe has held several appointments that include Deputy Director Education, Director of Records in the Zambia Army, and Deputy Director General, Education, Libraries and Museums. He has also served under the United Nations in the Democratic Republic of the Congo as a staff officer. General Sialombe, thank you very much for your attendance. And I now invite you to come to the podium to introduce the panelists.
Our distinguished delegates, allow me to write on the protocol already so established by the Director of Programs. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, our esteemed delegates, it is my great honor and privilege to serve as moderator for this very important and multifaceted topic on human trafficking, migration, impacts on security. Human trafficking and migration have significant impacts on security, encompassing various dimensions, as we shall hear from our presenters, and the insights that we shall get from the Land Forces commanders. I look forward to facilitating a very successive discussion that will lead to actionable solutions so that we combat the security challenges that come about because of human trafficking and migration. Time may not allow us to discuss all the areas of interest, but this presentation and the discussion is meant to ignite interest and further discussion on this topical issue. Allow me now to introduce the presenters for this important topic. The first presenter is Ms. Blair Harms, who is just on my immediate left. Ms. Blair Harms is currently serving as senior lecturer and the Oceania and Asenia Regional Program lead in the Regional Advising Division at the Institute for Security Governance. The Institute is the Institutional Capacity Building Center of Excellence for the Defense Security Cooperation Agency as part of the Defense Security Cooperation University. She is responsible for coordinating, planning, and executing institutional capacity building activities in support of country capabilities development and sustainment. Prior to joining the Institute in 2014, she worked as a liaison for military-to-military exercises in the Indo-Pacific region. Ms. Blair was commissioned in the United States Army from the California State University and retired from Army in 2012 after serving for 21 years in military intelligence and strategic plans and policy. Her previous assignments include multinational military training and exercise planning for the USA Army Pacific, teaching political science and comparative politics at the United States Military Academy at West Point, and postings to the United States Army Special Operations Command, 22nd Airborne Division, and the 2nd Infantry Division in South Korea. She holds a master's degree in political science. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Ms. Blair Harms. Our second presenter is Ms. Namatama Mildred Pumulo Sakabiro. She is a gender advisor in the Southern Africa Development Community SADC mission in Mozambique, Samim, where she has served for 2 years. Prior to her deployment to Samim, she served as a gender equality and social inclusion advisor. Previously, she has held several positions in the government of the Republic of Zambia, including director in the Ministry of Community Development and Social Services, deputy director in the Ministry of Gender, documentarist in the Gender Development Division, and as a librarian in the Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock. In her current position, Ms. Sakabiro provides policy and technical advice within Samim to the government of Mozambique and partners regarding the advancement of gender equality and women's rights. Her specific areas of expertise include gender mainstreaming, prevention and response to gender-based violence, child marriage, prevention of sexual exploitation, to mention but a few. She holds a master's degree in gender studies and a bachelor's degree in library and information science from the University of Zambia. She holds a postgraduate diploma in sexual and reproductive health, and she has several certificates in various fields, including peace support operations. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Ms. Sakabiro. Our third and last presenter is Professor Owen Schon. He is currently serving as a coordinator, Zambia Catholic University Center for Sustainable Development. Professor Schon is a Cambridge, Tate and Lyle scholar and read his PhD at St. Edmund's College, Cambridge University. He has lectured at major Southern African universities that include the University of Zambia, Mulungushi University, and in South Africa, Cape Town, Pretoria, and in Zimbabwe. He was 2005 India Council for Cultural Relations Nelson Mandela Professor for African Studies at the School of International Relations in New Delhi, India. From 2001 to 2017, he served as proposal reviewer, selector, and researcher advisor for researchers working on the theme African Youth in a Global Age and Next Generation Social Sciences in Africa Fellowship Program for the Social Science Research Council in New York. From 2015 to 2023, he has participated in the annual CJAX Operations Uhuru as head of civilian components and head of mission Uhuru at Zambia Command and Staff College, Botswana Command and Staff College, and Zimbabwe Command and Staff College. Other public assignments include membership to the Electoral Eminent Persons Group, Advisory Committee on Electoral Commission of Zambia, and Presidential Commission of Inquiry into Voting Patterns and Electoral Violence in Zambia. As a professor, he has published several publications. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Professor Owen Schon. Our distinguished delegates, each presenter is allotted 10 to 12 minutes to do the presentation. Thereafter, I'll open the floor to the delegates, especially priority to be given to the Land Forces commanders to share their insights on the topic under discussion. And I will request that we are as brief as possible so that we allow as many comments as possible within the time allotted to us. It is now my rare honor and privilege to welcome to the podium Ms. Blair Harms.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor to be here. I know that the topic today is migration and trafficking, but I'd like to focus on the gender considerations related to these topics. Migration is only part of the challenge that we face as a world. Refugees and internal displacement are similar and often linked issues that countries face that create conditions favorable for traffickers. Why do people move? Climate, conflict, and commerce. Trying to be a little bit clever there with all the C's, but you get the idea. Often these challenges or reasons are seen as political or economic, not directly or security-related issues. So why should we in the defense and security realms care about it? Because populations on the move impact our operational environments, and if not addressed, can create security threats. I'd like to propose that adding gender as a planning consideration can enhance and improve results. The basis for proposing a gendered perspective can be found in UN Security Resolution 1325, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. For this panel, the prevention and protection pillars are relevant, but all four are useful for us to consider. So who are the vulnerable in displacement and migration? Women, girls, and boys are often the ones we focus on, but the widows, handicapped, and other populations can also be considered vulnerable in these phases. Why are they vulnerable? The breakdown of society that comes with crisis reduces or removes the normal societal protections. What are these vulnerabilities? Trafficking is one of the big ones and the one that we are focusing on today, but there are some other additional vulnerabilities that are listed here. So how can security and defense forces prepare and plan to reduce threats to vulnerable populations? Here are some practical considerations and planning factors, ranging from how you arrange camps for the migrants or refugees or displaced, aid distribution plans, health access, representation, and general security in camps or areas where the displaced are held. Here are some recommendations. These are mine. They are not from the U.S. government. The gender advisors at all staff planning levels, incorporation of local, national, and regional women's organizations in preparation and response. Africa has an amazing tradition of strong civil society and women-led and women-focused groups to refer to. And the third is training and awareness on trafficking indicators for all personnel, along with resources to address and support the victims. In summary, trafficking is a risk for vulnerable populations, and this risk is higher during any displacement event. Women, girls, and boys are some of the most vulnerable of society. There are normative roles and responsibilities for defense and security forces to protect vulnerable populations, but also practical threat prevention considerations to do so. Having knowledgeable people in the planning for operations, the gender advisors, the women's groups, anti-trafficking experts can help your forces to be better prepared to respond for the trafficking challenges, better support victims, and reduce potential security threats to your forces. Thank you.
Good morning. Allow me to thank the government of the Republic of Zambia and the US government for inviting me to participate in this important event. So my role is to talk about the impact of violent extremism on women and children in Cabo Delgado province of Mozambique. I won't talk about the presentation outline. I'll go straight into making the actual presentation. So the background is that the SADC mission in Mozambique was deployed in July 2021. The initial plan was that it should just run for 6 months, but it has since been in existence for 3 years now. So Cabo Delgado province has been under siege by the insurgents since 2017, and it is estimated that over 1 million people have been displaced within Cabo Delgado, and the majority are women and children, as widows and as orphaned. And more than 5,000 people have died since 2017. So the impact of violent extremism on women is that there is high rate of gender-based violence within the communities and also in the IDP camps. There is a high rate of food insecurity within the province. There are some cases of sexual exploitation and abuse that have been reported within the communities, especially when the internally displaced persons are supposed to register for humanitarian assistance. There are also high rates of child marriages and teenage pregnancies within the communities. Most of the children have been affected because the majority haven't been to school for over 3 years now. So when they are not attending school, it means there are a lot of other issues that come with it, hence the high rate of teenage pregnancies. And some parents feel they would rather marry off some of their children so that they get rid of feeding more mouths. Those are some of the statistics on gender-based violence. We have about 76% of reported cases which are sexual exploitation and abuse. And then we have 11% of adolescent girls that have reported cases of GBV within those communities. Child marriage is accounted for 17% of GBV cases. And 6% of those cases are reported to have been committed by non-state armed groups. And 22% of the gender-based violence cases were reported when women and girls were trying to flee for safety. Women have been used as for sexual satisfaction within those camps of the terrorists. Some of the girls have been abducted from communities, and some of the women are involved and they're believed to be helping with teaching the young girls within those terrorist communities in the forests. There have been some reports of elderly women who have been found within those camps. Some of the studies also show that some women have been recruited to be able to help with intelligence, because most of them have information on what happens in those communities. So the women are abducted, the items that have been looted from those communities. There is also emerging knowledge that violent extremists like to recruit women leaders who have positions within the communities. So the situation of returnees within Cabo Delgado, you may wish to note that the majority of people have returned in those communities where they came from. Approximately about 632,000 people have returned. Unfortunately, even in the communities where they've gone, they do not have access to basic services, such as health facilities, education facilities, and also water and sanitation facilities. Some of them who are still in the IDP camps or in the host communities have decided to get back to the original places, not because the conditions are better there, but because there have been some conflicts again that have erupted within those communities where they have been hosted. So infrastructure also is not yet restored, such as police stations which were destroyed during the conflict. The school infrastructure also has not yet been rehabilitated, hence having most of the children still in communities without going to school. There is limited support to returnees, as both areas of return and where they are coming from are still lacking infrastructure. The humanitarian assistance also is limited, as we will see that WFP started distributing food and other necessities. Unfortunately, the numbers are more than what is being distributed. So SAMIM has done some activities within Cabo Delgado. For example, we implemented the early response mechanism program, where women, youth, and persons with disabilities benefited from capacity building programs. And also, SAMIM was able to mobilize about 200,000 from UNDP to help with the rehabilitation of Nangade airstrip, so that we'll be able to distribute humanitarian assistance. We also conducted some dialogue sessions for them to be able to get back to their communities and also enable a smooth transition and live in harmony as they get back to their communities. We also capacitated 280 women and youth with skills development. We also capacitated 96 internally displaced persons with information on gender-based violence prevention and response, and also prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse. We also mobilized about $160,000 US to conduct some capacity building programs on gender-based violence for community members and also service providers in order to be able to prevent and also respond to gender-based violence. We prepared about 175 civic leaders to be able to conduct dialogues within those communities, because it seems most of the people do not trust each other in those communities. So these dialogues will help them to be able to talk to each other and come up with solutions. The challenges. The first challenge is that gender inequalities are deeply rooted in culture. The other challenge is that conflict is still ongoing. It hasn't stopped. So the conflict is still ongoing. Therefore, implementing certain activities or programs is hindered. There is also lack of funds to be able to continue with some of the activities that we started. The other challenge is that there is high illiteracy levels within the communities. You may wish to note that only 30% of people within Cabo Delgado can speak Portuguese. And yes, Portuguese is the official language within Mozambique. So when you have activities, it becomes a challenge to ensure that you sensitize them using the correct language which they understand, as most of them speak Makua or Makonde or Kimwani. The other challenge is that there are high levels of poverty within those communities, and therefore some parents feel they should marry off their children, for example, to be able to get rid of some mouths to feed within their homes. There are also people who have been marginalized, and so they feel aggrieved, and then they will be able to join the terrorists. Most of the survivors lack knowledge or information on services that are provided within those communities. The other challenge is that there is lack of integrated treatment centers, such as one-stop centers, for them to seek GBV services. There is also weak enforcement of laws, resulting in delayed disposal of cases, leading to people losing faith in pursuing such cases. For example, in most of those communities, when there is a GBV case, they have to take that case to Pemba, which is the headquarters. So for people to pursue those cases, they feel lazy, and some of them do not have resources to be able to get to the headquarters. Some of the people who have lost everything are returning to areas where services and humanitarian assistance are largely not available. There is a concern about risks people may face should they continue to return where they came from. There is also limited services to meet basic needs, such as health, food, education, sexual and reproductive health. Allow me to talk about food, for example, limited access to food. My grandfather used to tell us that there are 3 types of people that are very difficult to advise. The first are those in love. A person in love is very difficult to advise. The second person is that one who is jealous. And the last person who's difficult to advise is a hungry person. So when there is no food, people can do anything to just get something to eat. So some of the recommendations or necessary actions, the first one is that stakeholders need to help the government of Mozambique to be able to implement the reconstruction plan through the ADIN agency. The other one is that there is need to conduct a gender analysis when coming up with programs to implement in those communities. There is also significant demand for mental health and psychosocial support. Most of the people have witnessed their relatives, their male relatives, beheaded, for example, or they've been killed. So they have been traumatized for a long time, and yet there are no services. So we need mental health and psychosocial support services within those communities. There is also need to rehabilitate the school infrastructure so that the children should return to school. They've been in communities for over 3 years. So that is a time bomb if we do not take care of that. So in conclusion, I'm saying terrorism and violent extremism continue to be global issues demanding international coordination, policy, and legal approaches to win the fight. Thank you very much. Muito obrigado. Merci beaucoup.
Distinguished delegates, good morning one more time. Let me also thank the co-hosts of this important conference for inviting me. And in today's presentation, I'll probably leave you with more questions than answers, since we are dealing with an ongoing challenge. But where possible, I will try to suggest a few possible solutions. My topic is human trafficking and migration impacts on security. And I've tried to give an historical as well as a contemporary look at this very normal, very natural human population movement process. Next slide, please. So, the outline of my presentation is that I'll introduce historically the beginning of the involvement of human populations in migration, emphasizing that freedom of movement is a liberating thing, and that that's where security problems are likely to arise. I'll look at one example of this, which is our own experience in Southern Africa of colonial prohibitions on free movement, and how the restricted access to land, to water, housing, and other resources was very closely the response to these restrictions, which engendered that people might have continued to be happy to be part of the British Empire. But because of the inherent inequalities in these restrictions, it became clear that if they were to improve their well-being, and everybody wants to improve their well-being, then British rule had to come to an end. And of course, there are security issues connected with that dialectical relationship between domination and resistance. I'll then look at today's challenge of collective security in the African Union's regional economic communities, in particular, in our case, the Southern African Development Community and COMESA. And these regional economic communities are very aware of the strength that lies in their unity. They are also very aware of the weakness that is obtained from the balkanization of the continent. Unfortunately, most of these processes are behind schedule. We have yet to have a common currency, we have yet to have a common market even, and even the freedom of movement within the boundaries of Africa are restricted. So if you would imagine taking a road trip from East Coast to West Coast in the US and having to apply for visas for every state boundary that you cross, would that even be an attractive holiday? So for us in Africa, we sometimes need to apply for visas to visit a neighboring country in which some of the people across the border are your own close relatives. And even this has security connotations, because when what you might call bandits, as they call them in Nigeria, cross the border and are given refuge, they are given refugee status not by the government, but by the villagers who are their cousins or uncles. We saw this in the Zambian case, with their familial duty of looking after their relatives. So winning hearts and minds in that situation is a major challenge which needs to go beyond a simple sensitization. Next slide, please. So, as I was saying, freedom of movement is natural. It has always been linked with the search for greener pastures, the search for a better life. And the picture I've put up, you are very familiar with, is from the annual migration of the wildebeest in East Africa. There's one also across the Angola-Zambia border, very similar kind of composition of animals. It's smaller and less well known. But the push and pull factors of this migration process are the same. The animals are looking for rain, they are looking for green grass, and the hunting animals follow where their prey goes. So, if the search for greener pastures is normal, if it makes sense, if it's biologically required from time to time, why should it be restricted? Next slide, please. The restrictions from the colonial period were linked to mobilizing the labor force from the villages to work in the mines, but not permitting them to become permanently urbanized. And in that whole arrangement, the colonial authorities, the missionaries, and the village elders connived to keep the young women in particular out of the labor migration process. It was only for the young men, and they would work until their contracts came to an end, after which they would go back to the village, whether they wanted to or not. This kind of attitude to migration, that it's okay for young men but it's not for young women, is still present in some of our cultural attitudes which have been mentioned, and also in policies. But where you have a conflict, as was mentioned earlier in relation to Mozambique, you have what we call forced migration. In other words, when people are made to move, not because they are necessarily looking for greener pastures, but because they are looking for safety and security to save their own lives. However, it's important to note that around 3.6% of the world's population, only 3.6% of the world's population, lives outside their country of birth. So although human migration is associated with all sorts of security and other problems, the majority of people have not left their home country. And those who have left their home country have tended to move next door, as I said, amongst their relatives. So whether it's in Afghanistan, they go to Pakistan or Iran, or in the case of Zambia, Mozambicans and Angolans cross within walking distance of the border, and they remain amongst their own people. Sometimes they've been repatriated at the end of the conflict, and other times they've been assimilated. So you might want to think about that. Which is the more permanent solution, assimilation or repatriation? Or should it be left for the refugees to choose? And in the case of human trafficking, which is closely connected with forced migration, I'll use the US Department of Justice definition, which says, human trafficking is a crime that involves compelling or coercing people to provide labor services or to engage in commercial sex acts. And the Southern African Development Community also uses a similar definition, emphasizing that young women are the most vulnerable to traffickers. However, from my own experience, I've seen that sometimes people approach the traffickers in order to gain access to the greener pastures, which I mentioned earlier. So we tend to see them as victims, but they see the traffickers as merely providing a migration service. Now the question is, why is this migration service not provided by the authorities? Because the gap or the demand for this service has emerged from this perception that certain governments are not on our side, or that the legal authorities put barriers before the migrant rather than facilitating their movement, whether they are migrant workers or even in some cases refugees. And it's not surprising that some of the most strong barriers against migration are to be found in Europe, hence the term Fortress Europe. Now, Fortress Europe has been working hand in hand with some African governments to try and police this movement. And of course, the emphasis is on the illegal activities, because obviously, human traffickers can also be drug traffickers and small arms traffickers and so on. That's the experience we have seen in the past. But we shouldn't just focus on those negative aspects, because there are some genuine migrants who don't receive the support that they should. In fact, if you look at the refugee statutes, whether from the UN or the Organization of African Unity, now called the African Union, you'll find a more user-friendly approach dating to the end of the Second World War, and also in the African case, to the period of the independence struggle. So, making the attainment of refugee status difficult only creates opportunities for the traffickers. Next slide, please. So, human traffickers and smugglers are linked to slave trading, to arms, small arms trading, and even to terrorism. And I was thinking, in the case of stowaways, I'm sure you've heard of stowaways who go on a ship not knowing where it's heading, just hoping to get to greener pastures. And in the Southern African case, the most common example we have is of stowaways on intercontinental airliners. So think about it. If a stowaway can get to a jumbo jet, so can somebody carrying a bomb. And the airport perimeter shouldn't be so easy to access. But Southern Africans have been recorded in London falling off a plane as it releases its wheels on the line of approach. And the bodies that are by then probably dead fall onto the ground. There has been at least one survivor. So it's possible to get to the promised land, as it were. But what we need to look at here is that security, human security, is not just about defending borders. Of course, that is important. And I would say defending borders is probably more effectively done by most of our governments than defending the citizens already inside from criminal, from health, from all these other challenges that are less spectacular than when your national sovereignty is violated. Last slide, please. So before I end and thank you for your attention, let me just leave you with some questions. What are the root causes and what are the potential solutions? Do we want to patch up or do we want to put an end to human insecurity? Who is the real protector of the citizen? Is it the state or is it the state in collaboration with civil society and the rest of society? And finally, the one that I really want to underline is why should any citizen approach traffickers for this ability to move to greener pastures instead of the government? I think if we can solve that problem, we will have gone a long way to reducing the insecurity that is associated with the process. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your kind attention. And from our presenters, Ms. Harms focused on why and how we should, as a defense and security organization, care about gender. Her emphasis was on the gender aspects that come about because of human trafficking. Ms. Namatama came in and gave us a practical example of how violent extremism has caused untold suffering in Mozambique. And to some extent, it has also caused human trafficking and forced migration. Professor Schoni comes with a different dimension where he looks at migration as a natural human phenomenon that must be looked at from a different angle so that we support our brothers and sisters who are looking for greener pastures before we term them as criminals. So before I open up the discussion, I think I will just pose one or two questions to our presenters. The first one, I think I want to give an opportunity to Ms. Harms to just amplify on her argument that human trafficking is higher during period of displacement. Madam Harms, you may wish to share your thoughts.
Hello? Yes, I can sing now. Thank you very much for the opportunity to clarify. So when people are displaced, they no longer have access to the resources or security that they have when they're in their home or in their own community. So they're more vulnerable to being recruited, coerced, deceived, abducted, sold, paid or promised a job for money by traffickers, and then the traffickers will then exploit them. Once a person is in the hands of traffickers, either voluntarily or involuntarily, they're at the mercy of the traffickers. Doubly so because the traffickers often take their passport or have their identity papers, but also because traffickers are usually moving these people across borders illegally. So whether it's voluntarily or not, they have broken laws by entering a third country or another country. So again, during displacement periods when people, whether it's again for crisis, conflict, or looking for greener pastures, they are vulnerable to being exploited by traffickers.
And Ms. Namatama, your emphasis was painting a picture of what is happening in Mozambique, and you have ably covered that aspect, where you have indicated that women and children are the most affected by violent extremism. But I want to give you an opportunity to talk to the land forces commanders. What role do you see them play or to prevent and provide mitigation on the impact of violent extremism, as you have indicated that it is one of the causes of human trafficking? I think you can give an appeal. They are here, they are listening to you.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to answer your question. So the first action that the land force commanders should do is to participate in strategic planning sessions to address the root causes of violent extremism. This involves collaborating with other military branches, government, NGOs, and international partners to develop comprehensive strategies that address the social, economic, political, and ideological drivers of violent extremism. The second aspect is to prioritize training programs for troops to enhance their understanding of the dynamics of violent extremism, human trafficking, and migration. This includes education on identifying vulnerable populations, understanding radicalization processes, and employing appropriate intervention techniques. The third aspect I looked at was community engagement. Land force commanders can foster relationships with local communities to gain trust and gather intelligence on extremist activities. By engaging communities, they can identify at-risk individuals, provide support and resources, and counter extremist narratives through dialogue and education programs. The fourth aspect was border security and surveillance. Land force commanders are often responsible for border security and surveillance operations. They can deploy resources to monitor and control borders to prevent trafficking of women and children, as well as the movement of extremists across borders. The fifth aspect is humanitarian assistance, and the sixth one is rule of law and justice, and the last but not least is information operations, to mention a few. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Professor Owens-Choni, you have given us a historical perspective or dimension of migration, and I should mention that a professor was my lecturer when I was doing studies at Copperbelt University, and is renowned for asking very tough questions. Now today I'm on the other side. I think I have to also revenge and give him tough questions. Okay, that is on the right note. So, Professor, these land force commanders, I think their mandate is to defend and protect the territorial integrity of their respective countries. And then you are bringing in another dimension of looking at migration, where they should focus on the human security. You may wish to maybe amplify on that dimension, where you're encouraging them to look at the human aspects, that these men and women, they are denying entry into their countries, are looking for greener pastures. For them, as far as they are concerned, they have to defend the territorial integrity of their countries. Maybe you may want to amplify on that one.
Thank you very much for that question. As I said, when it comes to defending the national sovereignty, most of our armies are very effective there. And what is essentially an immigration problem lies with home affairs and not with defense. However, the definition of security that I was working with, namely human security, goes beyond state borders. It's about the total comprehensive well-being of citizens. And yes, in the case of Zambia, the land forces have a tradition of participating in agriculture, participating in sports, participating in all the areas of human endeavor. So they are actively involved in non-military activities that enhance the security of the population. However, the state as a whole, in other words, all the different units of the state, do have a social contract with their citizens, with their voters. And that's why I would like us to think, those countries that are secure, those countries that have not had civil wars and have not had mass migration out of their borders, what are they doing right? What have they done right up to now? And those countries that are in perpetual conflict, what is the root cause? What are they doing wrong? And even those countries that have very firm and well-defended borders, but situations of criminal anarchy inside the boundaries, what is the explanation? There's a limit to the extent to which you can use the armed forces to solve civilian problems. And so we do need to look at the whole package of state-citizen relationships, and also of army, police, correctional services, and social welfare arms of the government. Because if I'm looking for greener pastures, it means the grass on my side of the river is dry or has completely succumbed to desertification. And that is a preventable process. That's basically the angle that I was trying to highlight for further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that response. I now want to give opportunities to our land forces commanders to give your insights on human trafficking and migration impact on security. You share your thoughts, just raise up your hand and then we'll give you an opportunity to give us your experiences in your respective regions or your respective countries. Yes, sir.
Good morning, and thank you very much for the presentations. I just have one concern out of all the presentations. I haven't heard of the political will being pronounced very much in addressing all these vices you've highlighted. what part do the politicians play? In any order, please.
Okay, to the presenters, the question is on the political will. What role do the politicians play, or what role do you expect them to play to fight human trafficking and migration? Anyone to take it, or we throw it back to Professor John?
Okay, I guess that's my line of approach. As I was saying, if you look at the decisions of the African Union, they are far ahead of actual practice. They have accepted the idea of an African Union, a common market, and free movement of people within continental borders, I guess extending to the islands in the Indian Ocean as well, and Atlantic. But when it comes to the daily management of this process, which they themselves are the architects of, either they run into bureaucratic or resource hindrances. But let me repeat what I had said earlier, that it's quite frustrating to need or to require a visa to visit a neighboring country in which some of my relatives stay. It's not for every country. So there are certain countries that are lagging behind. I remember Aliko Dangote, the richest man in Africa, saying he was given an African Union passport, one of the first recipients of the African Union passports. But when he tried to use it to visit other African countries, they demanded a visa. So what's the use of an African Union passport if it faces the same restrictions as the national one? So theory and practice, policy and practice are not on the same level. And the lack of political will, which has been mentioned, probably is a challenge, but it's not an explanation. Why should there be a lack of political will when we are in agreement that union is good? So I throw that question back to you.
Thank you very much for that response. Any other contributions or insights on the topic under discussion? Yes, sir.
شكرا للدولة الزامبية والدولة الأمريكية لتنظيم هذا اللقاء، وشكرا للسادة المحاضرون على ما قدموا. أنا بالتواصل مع السؤال الأول، ما هي الإرادة السياسية؟ سؤالي ما هي الإرادة الدولية؟ نعرف أن في كل بقاع العالم توجد منظمات إجرامية، وهي التي تستغل الفئات الهشة في أعمال مثل التهريب بكل أنواعه، مثل الاندماج الإرهاب، مثل التجنيد إلى غير ذلك. وهذا معروف، وحتى الطرق المتبعة وحتى الدول الموجود فيها المنظمات هذه الإجرامية أو الإرهابية، أعتقد من المسؤولية بمكان، إضافة إلى المجهود الوطني لكل دولة، لابد أن يتوفر مجهود جاد وصادق دولي للقضاء على هذه المنظمات التي تهدد أمن البلدان وأمن الشعوب. ولنا في تونس تجربة دقيقة وإحصائيات معروفة ومن كل الجهات، وأرجو أن هذه الدول التي تدافع عن سيادتها أن تحصل على الدعم الدولي، ليس الضغط الدولي أو توجيه بعض الاتهامات كالعنصرية إلى غير ذلك. القارة الإفريقية هي قارة وكل الدول إخوة، ونحن متحدون مع كامل القارة الإفريقية، لأن فعلا فيها أكثر الجوانب اللي كنا نتحدث عليها. وشكرا جزيلا.
Thank you very much for that contribution. And though the translation was cutting, I think the core is for us to work together as we look at this issue of human trafficking. Any other contribution? Yes?
Mine has to do with the aspect of migration and how it adversely affects the issue that borders on security. Migration most times might be positive or negative depending on the gravity of the situation. And it also depends on both the host country and the countries of origin. Over time, we've seen when wars are waged on particular country, we see people fleeing to neighboring countries for their safety and security. But then, over and above all, whilst they are in these host countries, we've realized and observed that they've gone through so many vices. Namely, we talk about segregation, we talk about discrimination, and also the aspect that borders on culture. There are cultural clashes whilst in the host nation. Now, aside from the recommendations that we've had, what are the plausible solutions that host countries should put in place in order to actually ensure that those disadvantages are not being meted out to those that have already gone to those countries for their safety? Because as land component commanders, we are very much concerned about the security implications. So what are the plausible recommendations we can take away from here, considering those negative aspects that the migrants go through in the form of segregation, discrimination, and of course, cultural clashes? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your insights. I think the question is on the host nations. When you receive these people we call illegal immigrants, and what is looking for is what are the solutions? How do we handle these immigrants who are already running away from armed conflict, and then they have come into your country? How do you make their lives safe? How do you make them feel comfortable vis-a-vis the cultural differences?
If I may, there is a significant and important difference in terms. So illegal migration is one thing, and there's a range of ways to address illegal migration. Refugees have a distinct international status that must be recognized, and there are certain things that the receiving country is actually legally responsible for in terms of international law. And those are the ones that are usually fleeing conflict. If you're talking about migration, that's often voluntary, and there are other ways to address that. So, I don't have necessarily the details here, but on the things that you have to do for refugees or people who are fleeing and requesting asylum, there are things that we can talk about in the breakout panel that we can address. Illegal migration, I think, as Owen has said, is a border security thing and possibly not necessarily a land forces it's a challenge, but not necessarily your responsibility or not yours alone. I also think that trafficking, and this is kind of the topic here, is a subset of that illegal immigrants, right? And how we address that and how we receive or identify trafficked people is another topic, and how do you help them because they've been exploited and need additional assistance. They're not just fleeing for economic reasons. And so I think that there's a huge conversation that can be had about the different categories and what needs to be done to address each of those as a land forces component. Owen?
Thank you. What can I add? Well, legal and illegal is a definition that's important for instruments of the state to work with. However, from my own research on xenophobia in South Africa, when there is a crisis, there's no differentiation between legal and illegal. The focus will be on the foreigner. And after the violence has died down, then the hostile communities might then realize that the shops owned by the immigrants were actually doing a service here. Now that we've expelled them, we don't have an alternative. So the solutions have to be holistic. We need serious behavior change. The legal angle is one, and it's very important. Prevention of illegal migration is more important than control, because once it has been driven underground, I don't think there's any government that can completely prevent it from happening. So, yes, the government has a duty. The society, civil society organizations have a role, and we need to look at it holistically so that we can stop the labeling and the demonizing, which crops up when people start saying they've taken our jobs. If they've taken our jobs, it doesn't matter whether they are legal or illegal. It's resented. And that's really the challenge that we need to look at in terms of changing the way we look at each other. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that contribution. Maybe the last contribution before we conclude, as we are running out of time. Yes.
Merci beaucoup pour la parole. Je remercie les organisateurs, dont la Zambie qui nous reçoit, ainsi que les États-Unis qui l'ont organisé. Je suis le général-major Edmond Ilunga Mpeko, de la République démocratique du Congo. Ma question se situe au niveau des populations transfrontalières. Nous avons parlé, ou les panélistes ont évoqué la migration comme un aspect tantôt de sécurité et d'insécurité, mais sans pour autant aborder aussi le problème des populations transfrontalières qui sont parfois à la base de l'insécurité ou de la sécurité. Mais pour ce qui est de ma région, la région Est, ces populations sont plus à la base de l'insécurité. Et on ne sait pas situer à quel moment ces populations, on peut parler de la migration réelle, tant que ces populations se trouvent de part et d'autre. Je pense, à mon humble avis, que certes, ce n'est pas une question de l'armée de terre ou de forces terrestres, mais un problème d'orientation politique au niveau national et aussi une compréhension au niveau international. Parce que ce serait difficile de dire qu'une population qui se situerait ou qui parlerait la même langue que celle de l'autre côté de la frontière soit considérée comme une population nationale à tout moment? Non. Il y a lieu que les panélistes nous orientent un peu à ce niveau-là. Deuxième chose, c'est par rapport au genre comme faiblesse et où porte au trafic humain. Certes, dans une situation de déliquescence telle qu'est décrite par les panélistes, comment empêcher ce trafic d'êtres humains? Une population déplacée, sans ressources, avec des budgets nationaux un peu contraignants et une aide internationale de fois qui n'est pas à la hauteur, comment empêcher ce trafic humain? Ne pensez-vous pas qu'on risquerait juste de parler de cette faiblesse ou de cette conséquence sans pour autant penser à de véritables solutions? J'ai dit, je vous remercie.
Thank you very much for the contribution. I think his concern is that there are those populations that live along borders and maybe they share culture between those countries. And then also the weaknesses in the legal framework at international level in addressing human trafficking. His main concern is that if we, from the presentation, we are looking at the problems that the populations are facing without addressing the real issues of what the international community should do to end human trafficking. I don't know whether is anyone who is ready to address that from the presenters.
Okay, I'll take this bullet, at least the first attempt. I would say that for resource-strapped organizations, which I would say almost every defense force out there is, we're always trying to do more with less. Education and helping people on the ground that are out there working with populations, especially along the borders, or dealing with refugee or displaced persons camps, to help them understand what to look for. I don't think it is the land force's responsibility to do something necessarily about trafficking. That is an international challenge that we all have to work towards. People are always going to be looking for greener pastures. People are always going to be looking for people they can exploit, whether that's for sexual purposes, child soldiers, domestic help. But having people able to identify trafficked individuals is key. If you can help your soldiers identify those people that are being trafficked, and there's indicators out there for how to do that, and we can help give those. It's a checklist. If you come across a group of people and they won't meet your eyes and they look like they've been bruised or somehow captured, if they don't have their own documents with them, there's checklists you can go through. And then there are international organizations, including the United Nations, that can help you process those people. Once you've identified them as being trafficked, there are other resources that are available that you can hand those trafficked people off to facilitate their onward movement or return to their homes or whatever is necessary. So even just the little things as education can make a huge difference in preventing trafficking.
Thank you very much for that response. As I indicated in the beginning, that this discussion and the presentations made are meant to ignite further debate and answering or finding answers to the challenges that we face. As we conclude our discussion, I think it is clear that human trafficking and migration is a complex phenomenon that is caused or influenced by a web of interconnected factors that range from historical factors, as was pointed by Professor Schoni, also economic disparities and social inequalities, and they also range to governance failures, and also the legal rigidities and loopholes that make people that are looking for greener pastures look like they are criminals. So in addressing these challenges, it is necessary that we employ a comprehensive approach that will tackle the root causes, that will promote economic development, that will strengthen or will review the legal rigidities that we have. And the last point that she indicated, that we have to enhance awareness and education to combat these challenges. To our land forces commanders, we want to encourage you to continue enhancing prevention through intelligence sharing, also enhance and modernize border security, and enhance training and capacity building. We believe that by taking these proactive measures, you will significantly contribute to protecting vulnerable populations and contribute to the overall security and stability of Africa. In French, they say, petit à petit, l'oiseau fait son nid. So bit by bit, we shall get there one day and have a stable and secure Africa. Thank you very much for our presenters for sharing your insights.
Moderator and panelists, I commend you on your insights. I think it's very valuable. This is the first of two plenary sessions today that really focuses on factors that are outside of the normal military purview that might cause, exacerbate, or prolong conflict and insecurity. I really appreciate from the Land Force commanders your very insightful comments. And the good news is we have breakout sessions where you can dive deeper into these very difficult subjects. We're about ready to go on a prolonged break until 10:45, and at 10:45, we will start the breakout sessions. I would ask if the breakout session leaders could come forward and identify themselves. So in your binders, in your itineraries, your breakout session.